Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a great honor to participate in today's hearing on this important topic and alongside these very distinguished witnesses. I'd like to start by saying I do not do any paid work related to the China currency issue, and that the views I'm expressing are not the views of any client, but personal views. I commend the committee for holding this hearing and for moving into a more activist mode on the topic that it addresses. And I want to start with key messages, two key messages to leave with the members of the committee today. First of all, China is, with its present currency regime, doing something it promised not to do, something that is inconsistent with WTO rules. Under that circumstance, responsive action by our government is appropriate. And number two, China's currency regime meets the existing technical legal definition of a subsidy, an export contingent subsidy. The administration's failure to act on that basis reflects a failure to faithfully execute existing U.S. law. And under that circumstance, the case for congressional action is very strong. I recognize those require some backup, and I would like to offer it now. Two key points on backup. First of all, on why China's currency regime is distinctive. The classic currency manipulation scenario is one where a government intervenes in a market where the value of its currency is being set by thousands of arm's-length transactions. By buying or selling its currency, the intervening government can influence the prevailing price in a direction of its choosing. In the case of exchanges of dollars for RMB, the Chinese government controls the price directly by ensuring that all of those exchanges take place at only one spot, its own window, and then completing the exchanges at an administered price. One way to think about this is it's similar to the level of the allowance that my wife and I give to our 3 boys. It is what we decree it to be, and nothing else. This is an additional element that's different from currency manipulation scenarios that folks are normally familiar with. The manipulation in China's case is that it chooses an administered price that reflects industrial policy concerns rather than economic fundamentals. This distinctive aspect of China's system has an important implication when it comes to applying subsidy rules. In my view, applying subsidy rules to this situation is something that should command broad consensus, even among folks whose views on other currency issues differ. The reason for the conventional wisdom that subsidy rules are hard to apply in this situation is because ordinarily, in the classical currency manipulation scenario, when exporters bring dollars back to convert them into their local currency at home, they don't do that at a government window. They do it with a private bank, and there is no financial contribution that occurs directly between the exporter that's bringing home dollars and the government. So this allows folks to say, well, the subsidy rules are hard to apply in that scenario, and they have to take a back seat to the other tools that we have under the IMF agreements and under the 1988 Act. This conventional wisdom, I think, is wrong in the sense that you still can apply the subsidy rules. It is possible under the definition that exists for a subsidy that a financial contribution with one entity could benefit another entity. But even if you don't agree about that, even if you can't agree about that, it doesn't matter at all when it comes to China, because China's situation is different. In China's case, there is a direct transaction between the exporter and the government. It is a financial contribution. It occurs at a government window. If the economists are to be believed, and if the administered price for the RMB is different in the direction of substantial undervaluation compared to what market forces would otherwise produce, then you have a benefit. And clearly that benefit is export contingent, because most of it goes to companies that can only get it by exporting. In fact, this subsidy falls in the central core of the export contingent category, the one that no one I know of disagrees with, in that it gives a Chinese producer a reason to prefer to sell a marginal unit of his output outside the country rather than at home. That is the center of the bullseye. In short, existing subsidy rules do cover the situation. Does that break new ground? Absolutely not. Are we discovering that it's already covered? Well, at least in the case of China, it is already covered. And there's nothing radical about that at all. I'd like to wrap up with just a couple of rebuttal points. If you are going to say that that taking this approach violates WTO rules, that means you must believe that either there's no financial contribution or no benefit or no export contingency. And I really don't see how any of those objections has merit. Ambassador Shapiro has argued that there's no financial contribution when you go to a government window and trade dollars for your local currency. I don't see any such gap in the definition of a subsidy in the subsidies agreement or in our law. If the exchange were one of pens for pencils or RMB for stock shares or dollars for bushels of wheat, any such exchange is a financial contribution, even if it's an exchange of one currency for another. Is there some problem on export contingency? As our import administration has said, it's unable to see any export contingency here. That's an absurd conclusion to have issued. Most of this subsidy goes to entities that have to export to get it. This is a fact pattern that's already been litigated. This fact pattern was the exact fact pattern that came up in the case of our extraterritorial income legislation, the temporary successor to the FISC provisions in our tax law, which occupied this committee's attention for many months. And the fact that some non-exporters are able to get the subsidy does not dissolve its export contingency. I will not bother to provide a rebuttal to the views of the folks who see no benefit here, who disagree with the consensus of the economists on undervaluation. I guess what I would say to the committee on that is after you've studied this, if you believe there's no undervaluation, then you should not vote for legislation, and you should not pressure the administration to act. I can't imagine that will describe very many of you on this committee. My view is that Commerce will do, if it gets started, a terrific job, as it does in other areas, in handling currency subsidies, but it needs a nudge, and it needs a nudge from the Congress, and that nudge should come as soon as possible. Mr. Chairman, congratulations on taking the committee forward on this matter, and I look forward to continuing to support the committee's work.